Red Umbrella of Hanoi, submitted by Vu Thi Lan. I had been traveling north from Long An province for a few days when I finally arrived in Hanoi. The old quarter, with its narrow streets and bustling markets, felt like a step back in time. The energy of the city was intoxicating, a mix of tradition and modern life, all packed into these winding alleys. But amidst the vibrant street food stalls and honking motorbikes, there was something else. Something older, quieter, lurking beneath the surface. It was my third night in the old quarter when I first saw her. I had been wandering through the alleys, getting lost among the endless rows of shop fronts and lantern-lit streets, when a splash of red caught my eye. She was walking ahead of me, a woman dressed in white, holding a red umbrella even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a quirk of fashion, or maybe she was just trying to shield herself from the late afternoon sun. But as I followed her through the winding streets, something about her drew me in. The way she moved was too smooth, too graceful, as if her feet barely touched the ground. And no matter how fast I walked, the distance between us never seemed to change. The streets around us grew quieter as we left the main thoroughfares behind. The lights from the shop windows faded, and soon we were in a part of the city I didn't recognize. The old buildings loomed above me, their shutters closed tight, as if they had been abandoned for years. There was no one else in sight, only the faint sound of the woman's footsteps ahead of me. My curiosity got the better of me, and I quickened my pace, trying to catch up with her. But as I rounded a corner, she was gone. I looked around, confused. The alley was empty, save for the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air. I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me. Maybe she had just ducked into one of the nearby buildings. Maybe it was nothing. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to turn back. But something pushed me forward. Maybe it was the strange pull I had felt ever since I saw her, or maybe it was simple curiosity. Either way, I couldn't just leave. I followed the alley until it opened into a small courtyard. It was dark, the only light coming from the sliver of moon that peeked out from behind the clouds. In the center of the courtyard stood an old house, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. It looked as if no one had lived there for decades. But as I approached, I noticed something odd. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. And there, resting against the wall beside the door, was the red umbrella. My heart raced. I looked around, but there was no sign of the woman. The alley behind me was empty, and the only sound was the rustle of the trees overhead. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward and pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked beneath my feet. The house felt wrong. There was no other way to describe it. It was as if the walls themselves were watching me, waiting for something. I walked slowly through the dimly lit hallway, the smell of mold and decay filling my nostrils. But despite the rot, the faint scent of jasmine lingered in the air, just like in the alley. I turned a corner and entered what must have once been a living room. The furniture was old and covered in sheets, as if the owners had left in a hurry. But what struck me most was the large mirror hanging on the wall. It was old, with a tarnished frame and a crack running through the glass. As I looked at my reflection, I felt a chill run down my spine. At first, everything seemed normal, just my tired face staring back at me, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A figure, faint but unmistakable, standing just behind me. My blood turned to ice as I realized who it was. The woman with the red umbrella. Her eyes were fixed on me through the reflection, her face pale and expressionless. I spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. I was alone, or so I thought. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I took a step back, my eyes fixed on the spot where she had stood in the reflection. My hands shook as I glanced at the mirror again. The crack in the glass seemed deeper now, splitting the reflection in two, but the woman was gone. The only thing staring back at me was my own pale face, wide-eyed and terrified. I wanted to leave, but my feet refused to move. The house felt alive now, as if it were holding me in place. The air grew colder, and the smell of jasmine grew stronger, almost overpowering. I could hear it now. Soft footsteps just behind me, echoing through the empty house. My breath hitched in my throat as I turned, half expecting to see her standing there, but the hallway was empty. I backed away, my hands brushing against the walls as I moved. The wooden floor creaked beneath my weight, but there was another sound too, something lighter, like the sound of bare feet stepping softly on the floorboards. I stumbled through the house, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to get out, but the more I tried to find the exit, the more lost I became. The walls seemed to close in on me, the hallways twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. Every doorway led to another room, another hallway, but never the way out. And all the while I could feel her, following me, her presence just out of sight, always one step behind. Finally, I reached the back of the house. A large wooden door stood before me, and I shoved it open, desperate for escape. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a small garden overgrown with weeds. The scent of jasmine was overpowering now, almost suffocating, and in the center of the garden stood an old stone well. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. As I approached the well, I heard it again, the soft sound of footsteps, closer this time. I turned slowly, and there she was, standing at the edge of the garden, her red umbrella clutched tightly in her hand. Her face was still pale, still expressionless, but this time her eyes met mine. She didn't speak, didn't move. She just watched me, her gaze heavy and unnerving. The air around me felt thick, like I was underwater, and my chest tightened as I struggled to breathe. I don't remember how I got out of that house. All I know is that when I came to, I was back in the old quarter, the bustling streets of Hanoi alive with the sounds of motorbikes and street vendors. The sun had risen, casting long shadows across the narrow alleys, but the memory of the house, of her, lingered. To this day, I can still smell the jasmine in the air, and sometimes when I walk through the old streets of Hanoi, I catch a glimpse of red in the crowd, a flash of an umbrella disappearing around the corner, and I know she's still there, waiting. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night clung to me like a shadow. I tried to move on, tried to convince myself that it was just a bad dream or some trick my mind had played on me. But every time I walked through the old quarter, I felt it, the same heavy air, the same faint scent of jasmine that seemed to follow me wherever I went. One evening, I decided to return to the area where I had seen her to see if the house was still there. Maybe it was all in my head, and if I went back, I could prove to myself that nothing was wrong. But when I reached the courtyard, it was as if the house had never existed. The alley was there, but the building had been replaced by a row of small shops and cafes, bustling with tourists and locals. The courtyard I had wandered into that night was gone, as if it had been swallowed by the city itself. I asked around, trying to find someone who might know something about the old house, but everyone I spoke to gave me the same puzzled look. "No old house here," they said. "Maybe you were lost." But I knew what I had seen. The house was real. She was real. I returned to my hotel, the weight of my experience pressing down on me harder than ever. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the pale woman with the red umbrella, her gaze fixed on me from the edge of my mind. It was as if she was always there, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. Around midnight, I heard it again, the soft sound of footsteps, followed by the unmistakable creak of an old door. I sat up, my heart racing, but the room was empty. The street outside was quiet, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the curtains. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched never left. The next morning, I packed my things and checked out of the hotel. I couldn't stay in Hanoi any longer, not with the weight of her presence following me through the streets. I boarded a train south, hoping to leave the memories behind, but as the train rumbled away from the city, I caught a glimpse of something through the window, a flash of red, just at the edge of the platform. It was her standing in the distance, her red umbrella open, and her eyes locked on mine as the train sped away. I blinked, and she was gone, but the scent of jasmine still lingered in the air, even miles away from Hanoi. Now, no matter where I go, I feel her presence. Sometimes it's just a faint whiff of jasmine in the breeze. Other times it's the flash of a red umbrella in a crowd, gone before I can blink. But I know she's still there, always watching, always waiting. And somehow I know that one day I'll see her again.